Hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't want to miss the bizarre, the grotesque, and the downright outrageous tales from history that'll keep you up at night. Ever heard of the medieval practice of trial by ducking? Spoiler alert, it involves a lot of water and not much mercy. Today, we're diving headfirst into a world where justice was served with a side of absurdity. Did you know that in ancient Rome, a man could be punished by being sewn into a sack with a monkey, a dog, and a rooster? Yes, you heard that right. And what about the infamous dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg, where hundreds danced uncontrollably for days? Talk about a party gone wrong. We're going to explore some of history's most shocking oddities, like the gruesome Viking ritual of Kraka, where a condemned man's heart was cut out while he was still alive. Or how about the medieval belief that a woman could get pregnant from a single glance? Seriously, did they really think a look could lead to a baby? Buckle up, because this episode will be packed with bizarre facts, like the year 1487 when witch hunts peaked. Let's just say, the burning question took on a whole new meaning. And don't worry, if you're finding it hard to sleep, just turn on loop so this episode can repeat until you doze off. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and prepare to learn about the weirdest, wildest moments in history that you definitely won't find in your high school textbooks. After all, who doesn't want to know what really went down in the shadowy corners of our past? Hashtag the lackluster history of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. Ah, the Viking Age. A time of fearsome warriors, glorious conquests, and, let's not forget, the ever-important mead halls. But did you know that among the clinking of tankards and the hearty laughter echoing through the timber beams, there lurked a rather unremarkable but curiously fascinating aspect of Viking life? Yes, dear reader, I speak of the Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. Let us embark on this absurd journey through history, starting with the earliest records. Hashtag the dawn of mead hall seating, circa 790 AD. The earliest mention of a mead hall seating chart can be traced back to the legendary Hall of Heorot in Beowulf, a poem composed sometime around 700 to 750 AD. Though it doesn't explicitly detail seating arrangements, one can imagine the chaos of a mead hall without proper organization. Picture it, a brutish warrior stumbling over the feet of a bard as he attempts to secure the prime seat near the fire. Who among us has not experienced the horror of losing their spot in a busy pub? The first real evidence of formal seating regulations comes from the excavated remains of a mead hall in Borg, Iceland, dated to around 900 AD. Archaeologists uncovered not just the remnants of feasting but also a curious set of wooden bench carvings that indicated specific seating arrangements. What were they thinking? Did they have a little Viking version of a VIP section? Hashtag the Great Seating Debate, circa 950 AD. Fast forward to 950 AD, and enter the infamous King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, known for his remarkable contributions to uniting the Danes and, strangely enough, for his obsession with seating charts. Legend has it that he decreed an official seating chart for his mead hall at Jelling, where he hosted grand feasts for his closest allies. King's Table, the best seats were reserved for the king and his immediate family. Rumor has it that the throne was so high that you'd get a nosebleed just looking up at him. Noble's Nook, right next to the king, these seats were for the local chieftains. They were known to engage in intense debates about the best way to roast a goat while trying to avoid the king's gaze. The commoner's corner, the remaining seats were for the average Viking, often located near the back where they could enjoy mead in peace, far from the politics of their betters. But what happens when a commoner accidentally sits at the king's table? A quick death by axe. A dramatic ejection? Surprisingly, no. It was said that the worst punishment was merely being forced to sing an embarrassing song about their last raid gone wrong. ###### The Seating Chart Codex, circa 1000 AD. By the turn of the millennium, the need for clearer regulations became paramount. Enter the Codex of Mead Hall Seating, not to be confused with the Codex Gigas, which is way cooler but less practical. This mythical document, allegedly written by a disgruntled scribe, outlined the following seating regulations. 1. Seating based on valor. Warriors were ranked according to their battle prowess. A list was maintained, and those who returned with less than 5 enemy ears were relegated to the furthest reaches of the hall. 2. Bardic seating. Bards were given seats at the front to encourage them to perform. However, if their songs failed to impress, they were required to sit with the commoners for the next feast. Talk about a demotion. 3. Mead consumption limits. Yes, there were limits. Each warrior could only consume 2 horns of mead before the third would require a performance review. Who knew Vikings were so HR-focused? But why did the Vikings care so much about their seating arrangements? Was it merely about comfort, or was there an underlying social hierarchy at play? Perhaps it was both, but one thing is for certain, seating was serious business. ######## The absurd anecdotes of the seating wars, circa 1050 AD. As mead halls continued to thrive, so did the absurdity surrounding seating. In 1050 AD, the infamous seating wars broke out in Norway. A series of feasts were held where rival chieftains attempted to outdo each other with more elaborate seating arrangements. The Battle of the Beards. At one feast, a chieftain named Ragnar the Rowdy decided to outdo his rival by creating a throne of solid gold. However, as he sat down, the seat collapsed, sending him tumbling into a vat of mead. But did he let that stop him? No. He emerged, soaked and triumphant, claiming it was merely a new dance move. The great bench collapse. At another gathering, a poorly constructed bench gave way beneath a particularly hefty warrior. Legend states that the crash was so loud it startled a flock of nearby geese, who promptly flew into the mead hall, causing chaos and laughter. Did some take this as a sign from the gods? Probably. ########## The arrival of seating etiquette, circa 1100 AD. As the Viking Age waned, a new era of mead hall etiquette arose. In 1100 AD, a notable shift occurred, influenced by the growing contact with other cultures through trade and conquest. The introduction of seating etiquette appeared in Viking mead halls, reflecting a newfound sophistication. The no arguing rule, a strict rule, was established where no disputes could be settled at the mead hall. If you had a bone to pick with someone, you had to take it outside. But who could resist a good argument after a few hornfuls of mead? The toasting tradition, each warrior was required to make a toast before taking their seat. Failure to do so meant an immediate downgrade to the commoner's corner. Talk about motivation. But was all this formality really necessary? Couldn't they have just enjoyed their mead without worrying about where they sat? Apparently not. The Vikings loved their traditions as much as they loved their mead. #######. The decline of the mead hall seating charts, circa 1200 AD. By 1200 AD, the mead halls began to dwindle in popularity. The rise of Christianity and the establishment of more formal dining customs contributed to the decline of the mead hall seating charts. However, there remained a flicker of resilience in the hearts of the old Vikings. One particularly humorous anecdote from this period involves a gathering that drew in both Christians and pagans. In an attempt to bridge the gap, they decided to create an all-faith seating chart that listed seats based on religious beliefs. The Christian choir, front row seats were reserved for the choir, who were entirely too sober to enjoy the mead. The pagan party, right behind them, the pagans were given a raucous section where mead flowed freely, leading to competitive singing and storytelling. One can only imagine the look on the faces of the serious Christians when the pagans began chanting their old songs. Did they clash? Did they bond over the absurdity of it all? Your guess is as good as mine. #######. Conclusion: the legacy of mead hall seating regulations. Though the Viking Age has faded into the annals of history, the legacy of their mead hall seating regulations remains a curious footnote in the tapestry of Norse culture. From the chaos of a mead hall without order to the absurdity of the seating wars, it's clear that how you sat was almost as important as how much mead you drank. So, the next time you find yourself in a crowded bar, pondering whether to sit at the front or the back, just remember the Vikings. They fought battles, forged alliances, and crafted legends, all while grappling with the vital issue of seating arrangements. Who knew that the history of mead hall seating charts could be so entertaining? And let's be honest, wouldn't you love to have been a fly on the wall during one of those feasts, witnessing the mayhem of seating regulations in action? Cheers to the Vikings and their mead hall shenanigans. ##### The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. When one thinks of Vikings, images of fierce warriors and epic sea voyages often come to mind. However, lurking beneath the surface of their legendary exploits was a far less glamorous aspect: the bureaucratic nightmare of mead hall seating chart regulations. While much of the Viking legacy focuses on their conquests and sagas, the dull but necessary work of managing seating arrangements in bustling mead halls reveals a surprisingly complex historical tapestry. ######. Construction methods and materials, 800 to 1000 AD. Viking mead halls were architectural marvels of their time, built to accommodate feasts, gatherings, and council meetings. Constructed primarily from timber, these structures were designed to withstand the harsh Scandinavian winters. The typical mead hall was a longhouse, featuring a central hearth for warmth and cooking, with communal seating lining the walls. Construction methods varied by region, but the following elements were common. 1. Materials *. Timber * oak and pine were favored for their strength and availability. Thatch * used for roofing, thatch provided insulation. Wattle and daub *, a combination of woven branches and mud, used for wall construction. 2. Cost *. Building a mead hall could cost the equivalent of several hundred sheep or a small fleet of longboats. Wealthy chieftains often financed these grand structures, with laborers working for food and shelter rather than coin, because what's a mead hall without a feast? 3. Construction techniques *. Post and beam *. This method allowed for larger open spaces without the need for interior supports. Dovetail joints *. A clever way to connect wooden beams, ensuring structural integrity without nails, though one might argue that a little iron could have gone a long way in securing those roofs. The construction of a mead hall was often a community effort, with skilled carpenters and laborers collaborating. However, once the hall was built, the real challenge began: who sits where? ##### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. The seating chart of a Viking mead hall was no trivial matter. It was a reflection of societal hierarchy, and the rules governing it were both intricate and, at times, absurdly rigid. 1. Regulations *. Hierarchy of seats *. The best seats were reserved for the chieftain and his closest warriors, followed by lesser nobles, and finally the common folk. A misstep in seating could lead to social discord. Seating charts *. Yes, even Vikings had seating charts, albeit rudimentary ones sketched in the dirt or carved into wood slabs. They were frequently updated to reflect changes in status or alliances. 2. Penalties *. Social ostracism *. A misallocated seat could lead to a lifetime of being the butt of every joke, much worse than a mere slap on the wrist. Fines *. Offenders could be required to bring an extra goat to the next feast as penance for their seating misdeeds. Public humiliation *. Those who dared to sit in the wrong spot might find themselves doused in mead and subjected to chance of shame, a fate worse than death for many. 3. Enforcement *. Seating overseers *. Often the chieftain's right-hand man, this individual was tasked with ensuring that all seating arrangements were adhered to. They wielded the power of a modern-day HR manager, but with a sword at their side. These rules and penalties illustrate a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of social dynamics, albeit one that often spiraled into the absurd. ##### Roles and job descriptions. The mead hall was not just a gathering place, it was a bustling hub of activity, governed by a hierarchy of roles. Each position was crucial to the functioning of the hall, and the responsibilities were taken very seriously. 1. Chieftain *. The ruler of the hall, responsible for overall governance, hosting feasts, and deciding seating arrangements. Responsibilities maintain order, lead discussions, and ensure the mead flows freely, because nothing soothes social tensions like a well-timed toast. 2. Seating overseer the enforcer of seating regulations, responsible for charting and monitoring the seating arrangements. Responsibilities update the seating chart, enforce rules, and mediate disputes over misplaced seating. A true Viking diplomat, if such a thing existed. 3. Mead master the individual in charge of the mead supply, ensuring that the hall never ran dry. Responsibilities monitor mead quality, manage inventory, and, when necessary, engage in verbal duels with neighboring halls over mead supply. 4. Cook the culinary mastermind behind the feasts, often a position held in high regard. Responsibilities prepare hearty meals, manage kitchen staff, and ensure the mead hall is stocked with all the necessary provisions. 5. Bard the entertainer, responsible for recounting tales of glory and heroism, often while seated next to the chieftain. Responsibilities compose and recite poetry, keep morale high, and avoid seating conflicts with the warriors. After all, a bard in the wrong seat could end up as the punchline of their own tales. Technical specs and inventories. The logistics of a mead hall went beyond mere seating charts. They also included detailed inventories of provisions, tools, and seating arrangements. To give readers an insight into this rather mundane yet fascinating aspect of Viking life, here are the technical specifications and inventory lists typically found in mead halls. 1. Provisions inventory Mead 200 liters per feast, or enough to fill a small longboat. Bread 300 loaves, made from barley and rye. Meat 50 sheep, 20 pigs, and an assortment of game birds, because who doesn't love a good roast? Fish 100 dried cod, the Viking equivalent of a snack. 2. Seating technical specs Benches typically made from planks of oak, each bench was approximately 1.5 meters long and 30 centimeters high. Stools reserved for special guests, these were slightly taller, about 40 centimeters, to signify their elevated status. Tables long tables, about 2 meters in length, made from sturdy beams, accommodating about 5 guests comfortably. 3. Seating chart template Chieftain, 1 seat center of the hall, facing the entrance. Warriors, 10 seats flanking the chieftain on either side. Nobles, 20 seats arranged in a semicircle extending from the warriors. Common folk, 30 seats filling in the gaps, farthest from the chieftain but still within earshot of the mead. 4. Miscellaneous tools Seating stakes used to mark where each group should sit, often made from twigs and painted with symbols. Mead vessels each hall had a variety of horns, jugs, and cups, with at least 50 dedicated to the mead master's personal collection. The legacy of the mead hall seating chart. Despite the apparent monotony of seating chart regulations, they played a vital role in maintaining order and preventing conflict. The intricacies of seating arrangements were a reflection of Viking values, emphasizing respect, hierarchy, and community. While the Viking Age may have ended, the mead hall seating chart regulations provide a unique lens through which to view their society. The next time you raise a glass of mead in celebration, consider the complex history behind that humble seating arrangement. And as for the Vikings themselves, they may have been fierce warriors, but they certainly had a knack for bureaucracy, proving that while they could conquer lands, they were also masters of seating disputes. After all, nothing says, "I respect your status," quite like a well-placed bench. ### The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. ###Introduction, setting the scene. In the grand tapestry of Viking history, mead halls stood as the epicenters of social life, where warriors feasted, bards sang, and sagas were woven over flowing cups of honeyed mead. Yet, beneath the surface of this revelry lurked an unexpected complexity, the regulations governing seating arrangements in these hallowed halls. Yes, you read that correctly. The seemingly mundane seating chart was an arena for bureaucratic struggle and social stratification, offering a rare glimpse into Viking civilization's less glamorous side. ###### Construction methods and materials. The construction of mead halls began with meticulous planning, as architects, if we can call them that, drew from both practical and aesthetic traditions. Between 800 AD and 1100 AD, various regions employed different techniques, but a few common threads emerged. 1. Materials. Timber, primarily oak and pine, were used, sourced from nearby forests. The choice of wood depended on local availability and the desired longevity of the structure. Thatch or bark. Roofs were often made with thatch or bark, providing insulation and protection from the elements. Stone foundations. In some cases, especially in Norway, stone was utilized for the foundation to ensure stability, an important consideration when housing boisterous warriors. 2. Construction techniques. Post and beam construction. This method involved erecting a framework of vertical posts and horizontal beams, creating a sturdy structure capable of withstanding the weight of heavy roofs and an equally heavy drinking culture. Wattle and daub. Walls were often formed using a wattle of woven branches, coated with daub, a mixture of clay, mud, and straw, for insulation and aesthetic appeal. 3. Costs. Building a mead hall could cost the equivalent of several hundred sheep, not including labor. Skilled craftsmen were often rewarded with mead and glory, while less skilled workers received the more dubious honor of being assigned to the less glamorous tasks, like cleaning up after the feasts. ##### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. You might think that a mead hall was a free-for-all of merriment, but no, a veritable code of conduct governed seating arrangements. The laws, often unwritten, were strictly enforced by the hall's chief, or jarl, who maintained order amidst the chaos of drunken revelry. 1. Seating regulations. Hierarchy. The seating chart was determined by social status. The jarl and his closest warriors sat at the head table, while lesser warriors and commoners were relegated to the periphery. The further from the hearth you sat, the less important you were, a sobering thought for anyone hoping to make a name for themselves. Guests, important guests, such as visiting chieftains or bards, were given preferential seating. However, the Jarl had the final say in all matters, often leading to disputes that could rival the epic tales recounted by the skalds. 2. Punishments for violations. Public humiliation. Anyone caught attempting to sit out of turn could expect a swift public reprimand, perhaps even a dunking in the mead barrel, an embarrassing fate indeed. Loss of mead rations. More seriously, repeat offenders could find themselves banned from future feasts, a fate worse than death in Viking culture. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### In the intricate dance of hierarchy and mead hall dynamics, various roles were essential to maintain order and ensure the smooth operation of feasts. 1. The Jarl, the chief and ultimate authority. Responsible for seating arrangements, he ensured that social norms were adhered to. He also had the dubious honor of mediating disputes, which, as we've established, were frequent. 2. The Skald, the bard and historian, tasked with recounting the glories of the hall. His role extended to ensuring that the seating arrangements were immortalized in verse, an ever-present reminder of social order. 3. The mead master, in charge of the flow of mead, the mead master had to navigate the tricky waters of providing enough drink while preventing chaos from erupting. A good mead master could make or break a feast. 4. The seat keeper, a lesser-known but pivotal role, the seat keeper was responsible for maintaining order during feasts. This individual would often wear a distinctive garment to signify their authority and might carry a staff or other symbol of power. 5. The cleanup crew, often overlooked, this group was essential for the post-feast cleanup. Their duties included collecting empty vessels and, one can assume, dealing with the aftermath of overindulgence, a task that required both fortitude and a strong stomach. #######Technical specs and inventories. While not exactly the stuff of epic sagas, the technical specifications of mead hall seating charts were often more intricate than one might assume. 1. Table arrangements. Long tables, typically made from planks of wood, these tables ran parallel to the hall's length, allowing for a maximum number of guests to be seated. Hearth proximity. Seats closest to the hearth were prized as they provided warmth and a clear view of the proceedings, essential for anyone wanting to impress the Jarl. 2. Inventory. Seating capacity. Most mead halls could accommodate anywhere from 30 to over 100 guests, depending on their size. Tableware, wooden bowls, horn cups, and ceramic dishes were standard fare, with inventories maintained to ensure no guest left without their share of mead and meat. 3. Seating chart examples. Epic table layout. The head table for the Jarl and his closest warriors would often be elevated slightly to signify rank. Guest tables. Lesser warriors and commoners were often seated at separate tables, sometimes arranged in a staggered format to allow for better viewing and listening. ######### A witty aside or two. Now, one might wonder why anyone would bother with such meticulous seating regulations in the first place. After all, wouldn't it be easier to simply let people sit where they pleased? Alas, the complexities of Viking social dynamics were such that allowing free seating would lead to chaos, like letting a pack of starving wolves into a sheep pen. And as for the cleanup crew, they were the unsung heroes of the mead hall, often lamenting that while warriors may win glory in battle, they were the ones who had to deal with the aftermath of the glory, and mead, shared later on. Conclusion, the underrated legacy of mead hall seating. Over the years, the regulations surrounding mead hall seating evolved but retained a certain rigidity until the decline of Viking culture around the late 11th century. With the rise of Christianity and the gradual shift away from the warrior ethos, the mead hall became less central to social life, and with it, the elaborate seating charts faded into obscurity. Today, we can look back at the seating chart regulations of Viking mead halls not just as an oddity but as a window into the values and social structures of a complex civilization. While it may seem trivial, the seating arrangements reflected the very essence of Viking life: hierarchy, honor, and the relentless pursuit of glory, all punctuated by the camaraderie forged over shared cups of mead. So, the next time you raise a glass, whether it be mead, ale, or something else entirely, consider the unlikely history that surrounds your seating arrangement. After all, you never know when you might find yourself in the company of a jarl, a skald, or, heaven forbid, a disgruntled seat keeper. Cheers! The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 to 1066 CE, is often romanticized through tales of fierce warriors, adventurous voyages, and the rich tapestry of Norse mythology. Yet, amidst the grandeur of longships and epic sagas, lies a surprisingly mundane aspect of Viking culture: the regulations surrounding seating charts in mead halls. While it may seem trivial, these rules illuminate the complexities of Viking society, the construction methods of mead halls, and the bureaucratic frameworks that govern daily life. Construction methods, materials, and costs. Viking mead halls, the social and political centers of Norse communities, were typically constructed using timber, stone, and thatch. The most iconic of these was the longhouse, characterized by its elongated shape and central hearth. 1. Materials. Timber, oak and pine were the primary materials, chosen for their strength and availability. A single large oak tree could yield enough timber for the frame of a mead hall. Thatch. The roof was often covered with thatch made from straw or reeds, providing insulation and protection from the elements. Stone. In some regions, particularly in Norway and Iceland, stone foundations were employed to support the structure against the harsh climate. 2. Construction methods. Post and beam. This method involved erecting vertical posts to support horizontal beams, creating a sturdy framework. Wattle and daub. Walls were often made using a wattle framework covered in a mixture of clay and straw, providing insulation and aesthetic appeal. 3. Costs. Constructing a mead hall was no small feat. The cost could range from 10 to 30 cows' worth of resources, depending on size and materials. Given that a cow was a significant asset, this represented a considerable investment for any chieftain. ### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. With the construction of mead halls came a need for order, leading to a complex web of regulations governing seating arrangements. 1. Seating hierarchy. The seating chart was a reflection of social status. The highest-ranking individuals, such as chieftains and their families, occupied the seats closest to the hearth, while lower-status members were relegated to the periphery. A strict seating chart was often inscribed on wooden tablets and displayed prominently in the hall to avoid disputes. 2. Bureaucratic rules. Formal seating assignments. At feasts, seating was predetermined, and anyone found sitting out of turn could face severe consequences. Guests of honor. Special guests were assigned the most distinguished seats, often marked with intricate carvings or decorative cushions, because nothing says, "welcome," like a seat adorned with the spoils of war. 3. Punishments. Violating seating regulations could lead to a range of punishments, from public shaming to fines. In extreme cases, offenders might find themselves banished from the mead hall altogether, a fate worse than death for any self-respecting Norseman. ### Roles and job descriptions. The mead hall was not only a social gathering place but also a hub of activity, requiring various roles to maintain order and ensure the smooth operation of events. 1. The Jarl. The Lord of the Hall, responsible for overseeing all gatherings and maintaining the seating chart. Often portrayed as both a warrior and a diplomat, the Jarl had to balance the needs of his guests and the feasts with the rigid social structure. 2. The Skald. The poet and storyteller, whose role was to entertain guests and reinforce social hierarchies through tales of valor and lineage. The Skald was known to often make a point of weaving in the seating arrangements into their stories, much to the chagrin of those who found themselves in less than glorious positions. 3. The Mead Steward. Responsible for the supply of mead and food, the mead steward had the crucial task of ensuring that all guests were adequately served according to their status, further enforcing the seating regulations. A poorly served guest could lead to a swift loss of favor, or worse, a public reprimand. 4. The Hall Guard. Tasked with maintaining order during feasts, the hall guard ensured that no one crossed the invisible line of social decorum. They also had the unenviable job of escorting any unruly guests out of the hall, a role that often involved both physical prowess and a keen understanding of Viking etiquette. ### Technical specs and inventories. The technical specifications of mead halls and their seating arrangements reveal much about Viking ingenuity and social structure. 1. Dimensions. Typical mead halls measured between 20 to 30 meters in length and 6 to 10 meters in width, depending on the size of the community. This allowed space for large gatherings without compromising the intimacy of the setting. 2. Seating capacity. A well-designed mead hall could accommodate anywhere from 50 to 100 individuals comfortably. A seating chart was essential to maximize space while respecting social hierarchies. 3. Inventories. Mead halls were often stocked with essential supplies, including mead, the lifeblood of any gathering, with quantities often exceeding 200 liters for larger feasts. Food, roasted meats, fish, and various grains made up the mainstay of the hall's menu, with special dishes prepared for honored guests. Seating materials, wooden benches and stools, often adorned with furs for comfort, along with decorative items such as shields and weapons that doubled as both decoration and status symbols. #### The dreaded seating chart disputes. The seating chart, while seemingly mundane, could spark heated debates and even feuds. 1. Historical disputes. In 950 CE, a legendary incident occurred at the Mead Hall of Jorvik, where two rival clans clashed over a disputed seat. The resulting Feast of the Fists led to a week-long brawl that culminated in a formal reconciliation feast, under a new seating chart, of course. 2. Etiquette gone awry. On another occasion, a young warrior mistakenly took the seat of a veteran, leading to a swift duel outside the hall. The aftermath involved not only a public apology but the establishment of a seating etiquette scroll, which outlined the importance of respecting established seating order, more riveting than any saga. #### Conclusion. The uncelebrated legacy of Mead Hall seating. While the tales of Viking warriors and their conquests dominate historical narratives, the regulations surrounding Mead Hall seating charts reveal an intricate society governed by strict social hierarchies and customs. The construction of these halls, the bureaucratic rules enforced, and the roles assigned to individuals all contributed to a complex system that ensured the smooth operation of what was, in many ways, the heart of Norse culture. In the end, the Mead Hall was not solely a place for revelry but a microcosm of Viking society, where every seat held significance and every chart told a story. So, the next time you raise a glass of mead, spare a thought for the seating chart that may have dictated who you would celebrate with, or who might have been left sulking in the corner with a lukewarm cup. After all, in the world of the Vikings, even the most mundane details can wield surprisingly powerful influence. The lackluster history of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th century to the early 11th century, was a time of exploration, raiding, and feasting. Within the heart of every Viking settlement stood the Mead Hall, a grand establishment serving as the social nucleus for community gatherings, storytelling, and, of course, the consumption of copious amounts of mead. Yet, amidst the merriment and revelry, a little-known yet crucial facet of Viking culture was taking shape: the seating chart regulations of these mead halls. While one might think seating arrangements were the least of a Viking's worries, they were, in fact, dictated by a complex web of construction methods, bureaucratic rules, roles, and technical specifications that left little room for improvisation. #### Construction methods and materials. The construction of mead halls was no small endeavor. By the 9th century, Viking builders had honed their skills, utilizing local resources to create structures that were both functional and impressive. Most mead halls were constructed using timber, often oak, due to its durability. The choice of wood was not just about aesthetics, it was practical. Oak could withstand the harsh Scandinavian winters, and as an added bonus, it was relatively easy to procure in abundance. 1. Foundation and structure. The foundation typically consisted of stone or packed earth, sometimes supplemented with wooden supports to elevate the structure above the swampy ground. Construction techniques included the post and lintel method, where vertical posts supported horizontal beams. This style allowed for large open spaces, which were ideal for communal gathering. 2. Costs. A mead hall could cost a chieftain anywhere from 200 to 500 silver coins, a staggering amount given that a skilled craftsman could earn approximately 5 silver coins for a year's worth of labor. Thus, the investment was significant, and the need for efficient space management, including seating, became paramount. 3. Seating arrangements. Initially, seating was rudimentary. Benches lined the walls, with the most honored guests seated closest to the fire or the high table where the chieftain and his family resided. By the 10th century, as mead halls grew in size and social hierarchy became more pronounced, detailed seating charts emerged to mitigate disputes over who sat where. #####bureaucratic rules and punishments. As mead halls became central to Viking social life, bureaucratic regulations began to take shape. By the late 10th century, seating arrangements were not merely suggestions but were enforced by a rigid set of rules. 1. Seating hierarchy. The chief and his family held the highest seats, followed by warriors, craftsmen, and, at the bottom of the hierarchy, farmers. It was crucial to maintain this order. A farmer sitting at the high table could lead to social unrest, or worse, a brawl over mead. 2. Penalties for noncompliance. The Viking legal system, known as the Thing, imposed penalties for those who violated seating regulations. Offenders could face fines, ostracism, or, in extreme cases, being banished from the hall. The most infamous punishment involved the mead bucket, where the offender was forced to drink the dregs of the mead barrel while others feasted around them. This was a clear deterrent. Who wants to be the subject of ridicule when there's mead to be enjoyed? ##### roles and job descriptions. With the escalation of seating regulations came the emergence of specific roles dedicated to maintaining order within the mead hall. By the 11th century, these positions evolved into formal job descriptions, each with a distinct function. 1. The hall warden. Responsible for enforcing seating arrangements, ensuring that no one strayed from their designated spot. This role was akin to a modern-day bouncer, and the hall warden was often a retired warrior with a fearsome reputation. 2. The mead master. Tasked with the production and distribution of mead, the mead master also had a say in who received the best brews. His decisions could affect social standing, so his job was essential and came with significant influence. 3. The scribe. Though not as common in Viking society, some mead halls employed a scribe to document seating arrangements and important events. This was crucial for resolving disputes and maintaining a record of who had offended whom over the years. ##### Technical specs and inventories. As mead halls grew in prominence, so too did the intricacies of their planning and management. By the turn of the 11th century, technical specifications and inventories for mead halls became a necessity for efficient operation. 1. Seating specifications. Benches were typically 6 feet long and 1 foot wide, crafted from sturdy planks cut from oak trees. The height was standardized at 1.5 feet, allowing for comfortable seating without compromising the view of the chief. A typical hall could accommodate anywhere from 50 to 100 guests, depending on its size. This necessitated precise planning of seating arrangements to avoid overcrowding. 2. Mead inventory. The average mead hall stored about 200 gallons of mead, requiring careful management. The mead master maintained a detailed inventory, noting when barrels were tapped and when new batches were needed. Fermentation barrels were often crafted from elder trees, known for their resistance to rot, and these barrels were stored in a cool, dark space to ensure quality. 3. Fire pit specifications. Central to the mead hall was the fire pit, often circular with a diameter of about 3 feet. It was lined with stones to retain heat and ensure safety. The fire pit not only provided warmth but also served as the primary cooking area, further emphasizing the need for proper seating arrangements. Nobody wanted to be seated too close to the flames unless they were fond of singed eyebrows. ### The complexity of seating charts. As mead hall culture continued to flourish, the complexity of seating charts grew. By the mid-11th century, formalized seating charts became the norm, and the process of creating these charts was a blend of art and diplomacy. 1. Guest lists. Chieftains often maintained elaborate guest lists for their feasts. These lists determined who would sit where, based on factors such as social standing, past grievances, and even marital ties. A clever chieftain would often invite rivals to sit next to one another, creating opportunities for conflict that could be resolved over a round of mead, or, conversely, lead to more significant disputes. 2. Strategies for seating. The seating chart was often a strategic document. For instance, a warrior who had just returned from a successful raid would be seated near the chief to garner favor, while a disgraced warrior might be placed at the far end of the hall, away from the action. An astute chieftain would use these arrangements to foster alliances, reinforce loyalty, and even quell potential uprisings. 3. The role of women. Women, while often relegated to the shadows of mead halls, played a critical role in seating arrangements, particularly during feasts. The placement of women could signal alliances, familial ties, and status within the community. A wise chieftain might ensure that influential women were seated in prominent positions, enhancing their social standing and solidifying their influence in the community. ###. Conclusion: The legacy of mead hall seating charts. The mead hall seating chart regulations may seem an insignificant aspect of Viking life, but they reveal the intricate social structures that governed their communities. From the construction of the halls to the bureaucratic rules that enforced order, every detail mattered in maintaining harmony and a sense of hierarchy. As we look back on this lackluster history, it's clear that even in a culture renowned for its fearless warriors and epic sagas, the minutiae of seating arrangements could spark laughter, brawls, and even political alliances. In essence, the Viking mead hall was not merely a venue for feasting but a microcosm of their society, where every seat told a story, a story that, much like a good mead, has aged beautifully over time. So, the next time you raise a glass of mead, consider the complex history behind where you're seated. After all, in the world of Vikings, it's not just about who gets to drink, it's about who gets to sit next to the chief, preferably without the threat of a mead bucket looming overhead. The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. The Viking Age, a time of heroic sagas, awe-inspiring longships, and, dare I say, some of the most confusing seating arrangements in history. While most people think of Vikings as fearsome warriors who plundered and pillaged, few realize they were also the original champions of mead hall seating chart regulations. Yes, you heard that right. Between the blood-curdling battles and the thrilling quests, Vikings had a penchant for bureaucracy that would make even the most dedicated office worker raise an eyebrow. Regional variations over time. Let's embark on this merry jaunt through the annals of history. First, let's address the geographical quirks. Vikings weren't just a monolithic group of marauders, they were a patchwork of tribes spread across Scandinavia, each with its own unique traditions and, you guessed it, seating arrangements. In Norway, for instance, mead halls were often designed with a central fire pit, with seating in a circular formation that encouraged camaraderie and, let's be honest, drunken brawls. Meanwhile, across the fjords in Sweden, the more pragmatic Vikings leaned toward long benches lining the walls. This seating arrangement not only maximized space but also allowed for easy access to the mead barrels, because what's a Viking feast without a constant flow of fermented honey wine? The Danes, being the trendsetters of the Viking world, decided to spice things up with a hierarchical seating chart that would make any modern HR rep weep. The head of the hall, the Jarl, got the best seat, of course, with a view of the entire revelry. Under his watchful gaze sat his loyal warriors, and at the very edges of the hall, well, those were reserved for the guy who brought the worst mead and the unfortunate soul who lost a game of dice. Laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. As with all things in life that involve more than two people, the Vikings eventually realized that chaos would reign supreme without some form of regulation. Enter the mead hall seating chart laws. Yes, you read that right. Laws. Edicts. The Viking equivalent of a city ordinance. In the 10th century, King Harald Fairhair, who had more than a passing interest in seating arrangements, decreed that every mead hall must maintain a seating chart to prevent disputes over mead distribution. This was no small feat, mind you. Imagine trying to keep track of who sat where after a few rounds of mead. Spoiler alert, chaos ensued. The laws went so far as to include fines for improper seating arrangements. If you were caught sitting out of turn, you could be docked a portion of your mead rations or, worse, forced to listen to the Jarl's cousin's terrible poetry. The horror. The meticulous record-keeping that followed was nothing short of impressive. Ledgers detailing who sat next to whom were maintained by a designated mead steward, yes, that was a title, who had the enviable task of managing the seating charts. This individual, often a former warrior who'd lost a few too many battles and found himself better suited to managing spreadsheets than swinging axes, was tasked with recording every seating arrangement. Their ledgers, filled with ink blots and the occasional doodle of a mead barrel, contained vital statistics: who fought, who feasted, and who snored the loudest at the Jarl's table. Logistics and supply chains. Of course, all of this regulation required a significant logistical effort. You might be wondering, how does one possibly manage the supply chain of mead and seating arrangements in a time when the concept of a supply chain was about as developed as a toddler's understanding of algebra? The answer lies in the Viking knack for trade. The mead wasn't just brewed locally, it was often traded for spices, herbs, and even fine silks from distant lands. The Vikings established a network of trade routes that would make any modern-day supply chain manager green with envy. Mead was transported in barrels, and the seating charts had to reflect not only the social hierarchy but also the availability of mead. If the supply chain faltered and the mead ran low, well, that could lead to riots, or worse, a very somber mead hall. One particularly famous incident involved a mead shipment that was delayed due to a particularly nasty bout of seasickness on the part of the crew. The mead hall's seating chart had to be rearranged on the fly, leading to the legendary Night of the Swapped Seats, where the Jarl found himself seated next to the village bard, who had a penchant for off-key singing. Rumor has it that the bard's rendition of Ode to the Leaky Ship was so grating that it led to the Jarl's edict against musical performances during mealtime, unless approved in advance, of course. Record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, let's not gloss over the specifics of record keeping. The mead steward's ledger was a fascinating document, filled with not just names and seating arrangements but also details like the mead's alcohol content, the mood of the guests, and how many times a particular warrior had to be escorted outside for fresh air. One of the most critical columns in these ledgers was the mead consumption record. This record, which tracked how much mead each guest had consumed, was vital for ensuring that nobody ended up in a drunken stupor on the Jarl's lap, a fate worse than death, or so the legends say. As the years rolled on, these records became more detailed, often including notes such as, Hilda got into a shouting match with Bjorn over the quality of the mead, or Sigurd attempted to juggle 3 mead mugs while standing on a bench, resulted in spilled mead and 1 broken nose. Imagine the chaos when the mead steward made an error in the ledger. A minor clerical mistake could lead to a feasting disaster, with a warrior ending up next to his sworn enemy or, heaven forbid, a lady of high status seated next to the village fool. The mead steward, wielding nothing but a quill and a bottle of ink, had the power to shape the course of history with a single stroke of the pen. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, you may be wondering, where does the borderline grotesque anecdote fit into all of this? Gather round, dear reader, for the tale of the Night of the Fermented Fish. Legend has it that during one particularly raucous feast, a mead steward, perhaps feeling the effects of one too many mead tastings, mistakenly recorded an entire barrel of fermented fish as mead. Yes, you heard me right, fermented fish. The unfortunate error went unnoticed until the mead hall was filled with the distinct scent of, let's say, decidedly non-mead-like aromas. Guests began to sip cautiously, only to recoil in horror as they realized they were guzzling something closer to a maritime disaster than a refreshing beverage. In a panic, the mead steward tried to rectify the situation by hastily rearranging the seating chart to position the fish-fueled warriors away from the more delicate palates. This led to even more chaos, as a group of rowdy warriors, fueled by the fermented fish, began tossing their mugs at the Jarl's table in a fit of laughter and revulsion. While the Jarl managed to escape, his prized mead hall was left in tatters, and the mead steward was forever immortalized in the annals of history as the fermented fish fool. The legend of that night persisted for generations, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of accurate record-keeping and the consequences of mismanaged supply chains. Conclusion. So, as we raise our goblets to toast the mighty Vikings, let us not forget the unsung heroes of their mead halls, the mead stewards, the record-keepers, and the brave souls who dared to enforce seating chart regulations amidst the chaos of revelry. For every tale of conquest and glory, there lies a story of the mundane, the bureaucratic, and yes, even the absurd. The next time you find yourself in a raucous gathering, perhaps consider the legacy of Viking seating chart regulations. Who knew that the path to a great feast was paved with laws, ledgers, and the occasional barrel of fermented fish? So here's to the Vikings, warriors of the sea and champions of mead hall seating arrangements, forever remembered in both glory and hilarity. Scowl. The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. Gather round, ye modern-day raiders of the internet, for I'm about to regale you with a tale so riveting, it will make the average history buff weep into their horn of mead. We're diving deep into the quagmire of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. Yes, you heard that right. Grab your helmets and prepare your finest mead, or your subpar, store-bought swill. We're about to embark on a journey through the bizarre labyrinth of regional variations, laws, taxes, logistics, record-keeping, and even a grotesque anecdote that will leave you questioning your dinner plans. Setting the scene, the mead hall. Ah, the Viking mead hall. The epicenter of social life, where warriors swapped bravado and medieval Tinder swipes over copious amounts of fermented honey and water. Picture a grand, longhouse-style structure filled with men and women who would rather take an axe to their enemies than sit next to someone who had the audacity to belch too loudly. But, as it turns out, seating wasn't just a matter of personal preference. It was a veritable minefield of social hierarchies, regional customs, and yes, even laws. Regional variations over time. Let's start with the fact that not all Viking mead halls were created equal. Depending on your geographic location, the seating arrangements could vary dramatically. For instance, in the coastal regions of Norway, you might find a more egalitarian setup, where the seating chart resembled a communal potluck. Everyone sat together, huddled around the warmth of the fire, sharing tales of how they pillaged neighboring villages. In contrast, if you ventured inland to a more mountainous area, the seating arrangements were as rigid as a Viking's cuirass. Here, the warriors would sit at the head table, while the peasants were crammed into the back, likely with a view of the fire that was more smoke than warmth. And heaven help the poor soul who dared to sit at the wrong table. The last thing you wanted was to inadvertently offend a chieftain by placing your mead-soaked bum on his favorite bench. Laws, edicts, and taxes. But the Vikings were not just brutes with a penchant for pillaging, they were also surprisingly bureaucratic when it came to their drinking establishments. You see, the mead hall wasn't just a space for revelry, it was a microcosm of Viking society itself, complete with laws and regulations that would make even the most tedious of contemporary government meetings look like a raucous festival. Local chieftains would often issue edicts dictating who could sit where, and these laws were surprisingly detailed. For example, there might be an edict stating that, "No man of lower standing shall sit within 3 paces of the Jarl's chair, lest he incur the wrath of the gods." Or, more likely, the Jarl's axe. Taxes were also involved. Yes, taxes. You'd think that after raiding and plundering, they'd leave the subject of taxes behind, but no. If you wanted a prime spot next to the fire, you had to pay a premium seating tax. This tax was collected by the mead hall's steward, who also doubled as a part-time accountant. Can't you just picture a Viking, clad in animal furs, squinting at a ledger by firelight, muttering, "This is more exhausting than a 2-day raid." Logistics and supply chains. Now let's discuss logistics, because nothing says good times like a well-oiled supply chain for your mead hall. The procurement of mead was no small feat, it required careful planning, especially when the mead was being brewed in various parts of Scandinavia. Imagine a Viking merchant ship, laden with barrels of mead, navigating the treacherous waters of the North Sea, all while trying to avoid raiders from rival clans. The captain would have to keep meticulous records of the mead's origin, quality, and even the seating arrangements required for the upcoming mead hall event. A barrel of honey mead from the shores of Gotland. Put it in the front row, but be warned, it might attract the attention of the local jarl. The logistics didn't stop at just mead, either. There was also the matter of food. Roasted boar, smoked fish, and various vegetables were all essential components of the mead hall experience. And let's not forget about the seating itself. Each mead hall had its own unique benches, crafted from the finest timber, or whatever wood was available after last week's raid. The benches were often marked with intricate carvings that indicated their social significance. This bench is reserved for the chieftain's second cousin, 3 times removed. Please, don't sit here unless you want a lecture about the family tree that goes back to Odin himself. Record keeping with lots of specifics. Speaking of meticulous records, we must touch upon the art of record keeping in the realm of mead hall seating regulations. You see, Viking societies were surprisingly advanced in their record keeping, using runes to document their laws, taxes, and, yes, even seating arrangements. Imagine a scribe, hunched over a scroll, scratching away furiously as he details the seating chart for the upcoming feast. Let it be known that Bjorn the Bold shall sit at the head table, next to Freydis the Fierce, who will undoubtedly challenge him to an arm-wrestling match after 2 rounds of mead. These records would often be stored in a sacred chest, kept under lock and key. This chest was a veritable treasure trove of Viking bureaucracy, containing everything from seating charts to tax receipts. "Oh, what's this?" you might ask while rummaging through the chest. A complaint from a disgruntled peasant about being seated next to the village fool. How riveting! One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, before we wrap up this journey through the corridors of mead hall regulations, let's delve into an anecdote that is not for the faint of heart. It involves one particularly raucous feast, a seating chart gone awry, and a rather unfortunate incident involving a goat. According to local lore, during one such gathering, a young warrior named Ragnar was so enamored by the idea of impressing the Jarl that he completely disregarded the seating regulations. In a fit of bravado, he plopped himself down right next to the Jarl, much to the chagrin of the others who were supposed to occupy that spot. As the evening wore on and the mead flowed like water, Ragnar decided to show off his prowess by attempting to juggle mead horns. Unfortunately, in a moment of utter clumsiness, he lost control, sending one horn careening toward the goat that was tied up nearby, because what's a Viking feast without a goat? The goat, startled and enraged, charged at Ragnar, who had not only spilled mead all over himself but also managed to knock over the Jarl's prized ceremonial axe in the process. The whole mead hall erupted into chaos, with warriors laughing, the Jarl fuming, and the goat making a beeline for the exit. This incident became known as the Great Goat Fiasco of 823 AD, and it served as a cautionary tale for generations to come. From that day forward, anyone who dared to violate the seating chart faced the threat of a goat being unleashed upon them, a fate worse than death, or so they said. Conclusion: the legacy of mead hall seating charts. And there you have it, the riveting tale of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. Who knew that the humble act of sitting down to enjoy a drink could involve such complexity? From regional variations and laws to logistics and record-keeping, the mead hall was not just a place for drinking, it was a social arena that mirrored the intricacies of Viking life. So, the next time you find yourself at a gathering, perhaps you'll think twice about where you choose to plop down your derriere. After all, you never know when a goat might come charging through, seeking vengeance on those who dare disturb the social order of the mead hall. Scowl. The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. Ah, the Viking Age, a time of daring raiders, epic sagas, and enough horned helmets to make any fashionista weep with envy. Among the tales of conquests and sea voyages, however, lies a less than riveting aspect of Viking life, the seating chart regulations of mead halls. Yes, dear reader, while the sagas paint a picture of valiant warriors feasting and drinking to their heart's content, the reality was that someone had to organize the chaos. The mead hall, that hallowed ground of debauchery and brotherhood, was also the site of some of history's most tedious bureaucratic maneuvers, complete with regional variations, laws, taxes, and the kind of record-keeping that would make even the most fervent accountant's heart flutter with excitement. Regional variations over time. Once upon a time in the frosty realms of Scandinavia, the mead hall was more than just a place to quaff fermented honey and swap fishy tales. Each region had its own set of unspoken rules and regulations regarding who sat where. In the icy fjords of Norway, for instance, it was customary for the chieftain to occupy the seat nearest the fire, a prime spot for warmth and dominance. But venture south to the windswept plains of Denmark, and you'd find a rather democratic approach, where even the lowliest thrall could snag a seat at the table, provided they brought a decent cask of mead to share. The Swedes, those crafty logicians of the north, even established a rotation system that would put any modern-day potluck to shame. Imagine a mead hall where the seating chart was updated weekly, ensuring that everyone got their turn next to the most popular warriors and, naturally, the best food. If you're thinking this sounds like a recipe for backstabbing and simmering resentments, you're absolutely correct. The indignation of being seated next to the guy who can't stop talking about his mother's stew was, indeed, the Viking Age's version of a social faux pas. Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. What do you get when you cross a Viking warrior with a bureaucrat? A very confused individual, likely attempting to enforce mead hall seating regulations while simultaneously preparing for a raid. But alas, the Vikings were not immune to the bureaucratic tendencies that plague all societies. Laws and edicts began to emerge, detailing the proper seating arrangements based on rank, status, and even regional alliances. For instance, in the late 10th century, King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, an early adopter of both Christianity and Bluetooth technology, just kidding, he only had the name, issued a royal edict that stipulated, "Let it be known that any man who dares to sit before his betters shall find himself at the bottom of the fjord." A charming sentiment, but it also meant that the seating chart was no longer just about who brought the best mead, it was about life and death. And let's not forget the taxes. Ah, yes, taxes, the bane of every Viking's existence. In some regions, mead hall seating was even taxed. Yes, you heard that right. The more esteemed your seat, the heftier your tax burden. This meant that warriors had to balance their desire for a prime seat with the grim reality of their dwindling coin purse. Do I want to sit next to the chieftain and pay an arm and a leg, or do I settle for the back corner with the guy who thinks a chicken leg is a good substitute for a mead cup? Deciding how to allocate resources was no easy feat, even for the most daring of raiders. To keep track of these various laws, taxes, and seating arrangements, Vikings relied on a rather impressive system of ledgers. Some enterprising soul, likely with a penchant for the orderly, took it upon themselves to keep meticulous records of who sat where and what they owed to the chieftain. These ledgers were anything but exciting, filled with columns of names, dates, and mead consumption rates that could put even the most dedicated insomniac to sleep. If a Viking was recorded as having taken the prime seat 3 times in a row, a fine was levied. When you think about it, the Vikings had a strange obsession with order amidst their chaotic lifestyles, like a group of marauding accountants. Logistics and supply chains. Of course, maintaining a mead hall seating chart wasn't just about who sat where and how much they owed, it also involved a complex web of logistics and supply chains. Much like modern-day event planners trying to accommodate dietary restrictions, gluten-free, nut-free, mead-free, Viking leaders had to consider various factors before the mead hall festivities began. Imagine a bustling mead hall where the chief steward was darting around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to ensure that there was enough mead for the expected guests while also accounting for latecomers. The steward had to keep tabs on who was bringing what, how much mead was on hand, and whether the roast boar was big enough to feed everyone, including the last-minute invitees who thought it'd be a great idea to bring their entire clan. To complicate matters further, mead was not just a beverage, it was a currency. The type of mead you brought dictated your status. A warrior arriving with a cask of quality honey mead was likely to be seated closer to the fire than the one lugging a half-empty jug of questionable brew. This created a supply chain that rivaled even the most sophisticated modern logistics operations. Grain had to be harvested, honey foraged, and fermentation carefully monitored. If a warrior showed up with subpar mead, the logistics team would have to scramble to ensure that the seating chart was adjusted accordingly, because nothing says, gathering of warriors, like a room full of disgruntled, inebriated men. Record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, let's talk specifics. The record-keeping practices of the Viking Age were surprisingly detailed, especially considering that most of their time was spent raiding, pillaging, and perfecting their mead recipes. Each mead hall had its own scribe, an individual who would jot down not just the seating arrangements but also the types of mead consumed, the dishes served, and even the snarky comments made by guests. If you were particularly unfortunate, or fortunate, depending on your perspective, you might find your name mentioned in the records alongside a note about how you passed out after too many cups of honey mead, drooling on the table like a particularly ungraceful walrus. In one particularly meticulous mead hall ledger from the early 11th century, a scribe noted the following details from a feast. On the 14th day of the frost moon, the great chieftain Ragnar sat next to his trusted warrior Bjorn. They consumed 3 casks of honey mead, 1 roasted boar, and 7 loaves of bread. Notable incidents included Thorstein spilling mead on the chieftain's new tunic and a heated debate over the best method for raiding coastal villages. The specificity of these records was not just for posterity, they served a practical purpose. Disputes over seating arrangements were common. If you claimed a seat that wasn't yours, you could be called out in the next mead hall meeting, an embarrassing fate for any Viking. The records acted as a sort of mead hall insurance policy, allowing for peaceful resolutions to disputes and ensuring that everyone knew their place, at least until the next round of mead was served. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, dear reader, we arrive at the most entertaining part of our mead hall saga, the anecdote that would make even the most hardened Viking squirm. Legend has it that during a particularly raucous feast in a mead hall in Norway, a misunderstanding over seating arrangements escalated into chaos. It began when a young warrior named Olav, desperate to impress his comrades, decided to sit in the chieftain's seat, convinced that the mead would flow freely if he were at the head of the table. What Olav didn't account for was the fact that the chieftain had just returned from a raid and was, shall we say, less than pleased to find a mere thrall occupying what was rightfully his. The chieftain, fueled by both mead and indignation, summoned his men and demanded that Olav be removed. However, in a classic case of too much mead makes for poor decision-making, the warriors around the table misheard the command, thinking they were to defend Olav's right to the seat. What followed can only be described as a frenzy. In the ensuing melee, mead was spilled, food was thrown, and Olav, in a moment of both brilliance and stupidity, stood atop the table and shouted, "I claim this mead hall in the name of—" But before he could finish, he lost his balance, crashing down into a platter of roasted boar. The sight of Olav, covered in grease and mead, was so grotesque that it brought the entire hall to a standstill. The chieftain, initially furious, found himself unable to contain his laughter, and soon the entire mead hall erupted into fits of giggles. From that day forward, Olav was known as Boar Face, a moniker that would follow him through many a feast and serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of misjudging your place in the mead hall hierarchy, or, at the very least, the importance of a sturdy table. In conclusion, while the Viking Age is often romanticized through tales of daring exploits and legendary battles, one must not overlook the equally fascinating, if less glamorous, world of mead hall seating chart regulations. From regional variations and laws to the logistics of mead supply chains and the meticulous record-keeping, the Vikings had their own brand of order amidst the chaos. And let's not forget the delightful absurdities that emerged from the necessity of seating arrangements. Next time you raise a glass of mead, or whatever your beverage of choice may be, take a moment to appreciate the meticulously crafted history that led to that moment, complete with all its hilarious and horrifying quirks. Cheers! The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. Ah, the Viking Age! A time of pillaging, plundering, and, most importantly, drinking copious amounts of mead while sitting on exceptionally uncomfortable benches. But as it turns out, even in the midst of terrifying raids and epic sagas, the Vikings had a penchant for organization that would put even the most fastidious modern-day event planner to shame. Enter the curious and somewhat lackluster world of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. ### regional variations over time. Let's start with a broad overview of how seating arrangements varied across different Viking communities. Picture this, a bustling mead hall in the heart of Norway, the air thick with the aroma of roasted boar and the faint, yet potent, scent of fermented honey. Here, the seating was dictated not only by social hierarchy but by geographical whims. In the fjords, where space was at a premium, seating arrangements were akin to a game of musical chairs, only the chairs were hewn from the finest oak and the music was the sound of warriors bellowing out sagas. Meanwhile, in the more expansive fields of Sweden, mead halls could comfortably accommodate entire clans, leading to a more egalitarian approach to seating. However, the Swedes had their own flair for hierarchy. The higher your status, the closer you sat to the hearth, and let's not even get started on the ritualistic placement of the mead barrels. These were often more strategically positioned than the king's throne itself. Across the North Sea in England, Viking influence led to a curious blend of Saxon and Norse traditions. Here, you might find a curious seating arrangement where the nobles basked in their glory while the common folk were relegated to the shadows, literally. This led to a peculiar phenomenon known as the mead hall shuffle, where the less fortunate would awkwardly maneuver their way through a sea of beefy thighs and flowing tunics to snag a drink, all while trying to avoid spilling it on the highborn. ### laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. You might be thinking, surely, in a world filled with swords and sagas, there was no room for bureaucracy. Oh, ye of little faith! Viking governments were surprisingly astute when it came to the minutiae of mead hall operations. Enter the thing, not the monster from your favorite horror flick, but the traditional assembly of free men who gathered to discuss laws, trade agreements, and, yes, seating regulations. By the late 10th century, the seating chart had become a matter of public record. Yes, you heard that right. Local chieftains would issue edicts detailing who could sit where, often based on a complex interplay of wealth, lineage, and the ability to hold one's mead without spilling it on the floor. The more important you were, the fancier your spot, and if you were caught sitting in the wrong place, well, it was all very scandalous. Taxes were even levied on seating arrangements. It was known as the chair tax, and it was quite the burden. Nobles with plush seating options were forced to pay higher rates than their bench-sitting counterparts. This led to some rather amusing loopholes where crafty Vikings would trade their cushy seats for a few barrels of mead and a promise not to get caught. Imagine the conversations: "I'll trade you my throne for 2 casks of the good stuff and a promise to keep your mouth shut about it." Records were meticulously kept by scribes who were often far too sober for their own good. They'd jot down ledger entries like, "Bjorn the Brave sat next to Freya the Fair," resulting in a 17% increase in mead consumption. These records have provided historians with a treasure trove of information, though one can't help but wonder what kind of wild tales were left out for fear of historical embarrassment. #### logistics and supply chains. Now, on to logistics, because, believe it or not, seating arrangements were not merely a matter of personal preference or social standing, they were a logistics nightmare. Picture the scene: it's a Saturday night, the mead hall is packed, and Thor is throwing a feast to celebrate his latest conquest of the neighboring village. The mead must flow, the boar must roast, and the seating must be arranged with the precision of a military operation. Vikings were masters of supply chain management, long before the term was even conceived. They had to coordinate the movement of not only mead but also chairs, benches, and tables from various locations. The timber for seating often came from distant forests, requiring careful planning and the foresight to avoid any pesky lumberjack disputes. You hadn't truly lived until you'd witnessed a full-blown brawl over a particularly fine piece of oak, all while the mead flowed freely. As for the mead itself, various regions specialized in their own concoctions. The honey harvested in the lush pastures of Denmark was different from that found in the rugged landscape of Iceland. This meant that each mead hall had its own house special, which could dictate seating arrangements as well. If you were known for serving the finest honey mead in the realm, you could bet your bottom silver coin that your hall would be packed, and your seating would be a hot commodity. #### record keeping with lots of specifics. The Viking penchant for record keeping extended beyond mere seating arrangements. They meticulously documented everything from mead recipes to the comings and goings of their esteemed guests. The skalds, or poets, were particularly fond of weaving tales into their records, which often included detailed accounts of who sat next to whom and the infamous spillage incidents. One particularly infamous entry in the saga of the Mead Hall recounts an evening when a particularly inebriated warrior named Rolf took it upon himself to challenge the seating chart. He declared himself king for the night, leading to a cascading series of events that included overturned tables, spilled mead, and a hasty, return to your designated spots edict issued by the local chieftain. And, of course, there were the infamous Mead Hall audits. Yes, audits. Chieftains would hire scribes to come in and ensure that seating arrangements were being followed to the letter. You can imagine the horror on the faces of those caught sitting in the wrong place, like children caught sneaking cookies before dinner. The penalties for non-compliance were severe: a night without mead, or worse, a public shaming. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, let's get to the meat of the matter, or perhaps the mead, shall we? One of the most eyebrow-raising anecdotes from this tumultuous time involves a rather unfortunate incident at a Mead Hall feast in the village of Skjold. It was a grand affair, with nobles, warriors, and the occasional poet all gathered to celebrate a successful raid. As the evening progressed, the mead flowed like water, and the seating chart was all but forgotten. That is until a particularly intoxicated warrior, Sigurd the Gory, decided to assert his dominance by leaping onto the long table and proclaiming himself the Lord of the Mead. Unfortunately, as he made his grand declaration, he lost his footing and, in a moment of slapstick glory, crashed down onto the table, sending platters of roasted meat and bowls of mead flying in all directions. But here's where it takes a grotesque turn. As Sigurd landed, he inadvertently crushed the beloved ceremonial mead horn of the village's high priest, Bjorn the Pious. The horn, which had been passed down through generations and was said to contain the spirits of their ancestors, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The crowd fell silent, the jovial atmosphere turned to one of horror, and Sigurd, in a state of pure panic, attempted to salvage the situation by claiming that the ancestors had blessed the Mead Hall with their spirit. To add insult to injury, Sigurd, still inebriated and clearly out of touch with reality, picked up a piece of the broken horn and began to drink from it, claiming it was now the ultimate vessel for mead. The sight of a grown man sipping from the jagged remains of a ceremonial artifact while surrounded by horrified onlookers is an image that has lived on in infamy, an anecdote that would be whispered about for generations. Conclusion. So there you have it, the somewhat lackluster but undeniably fascinating history of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. From regional variations and legal edicts to logistics and the occasional grotesque anecdote, the seating arrangements of Viking mead halls were far more important than one might initially think. Beneath the fierce exterior of these seafaring warriors lay a complex web of social norms, rules, and, of course, the occasional hilarious mishap that would keep even the most stoic of historians chuckling for centuries to come. So, the next time you find yourself at a gathering, perhaps raise a glass in honor of the Viking tradition of seating arrangements, or at least take a moment to ensure you're not inadvertently sitting in the wrong place. After all, you never know when a Sigurd the Gory might come crashing down to make a scene. The lackluster history of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations, a surprisingly entertaining exploration. Ah, The Viking Age, a time of valiant warriors, daring raids, and the insatiable quest for mead. When you think of Vikings, your mind likely conjures images of longships slicing through icy waters, horned helmets, which, let's be honest, were probably more of a fashion faux pas, and, of course, brawny Norsemen engaging in epic battles. However, if you look closely, there's an often overlooked saga lurking in the shadows of history, the riveting tale of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. Yes, you heard that right. It's not all pillaging and plundering, even the most fearsome of warriors had to sit down somewhere. Regional variations over time, the Mead Hall melting pot. First, let's establish that Viking society was not a monolithic entity. No, far from it. Vikings were as diverse as the meads they drank. The Scandinavian regions, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, had their own unique customs, and these differences extended even to how one arranged the seating in a mead hall. In Norway, mead halls were often intimate affairs. Picture a cozy longhouse with a roaring fire at its center, where warriors gathered in a semicircle around the warmth. Here, seating was usually determined by social standing. The chieftain would claim the seat of honor, while those of lesser status sat at a respectful distance. If you were a lowly foot soldier, you were probably just happy to snag a spot that didn't involve sitting on the floor. Contrast this with the Swedish mead halls, which were known for their sprawling layouts and elaborate seating arrangements. Here, it was all about status and spectacle. Chieftains had their own raised platforms, complete with lavish cushions that would make modern-day IKEA jealous. Everyone else? Well, they could either stand or sit on benches, which were often just glorified planks of wood. The Swedish mead hall was a veritable catwalk of social hierarchy, with each guest vying for the best view of the chieftain's mead-fueled boasts. And then there were the Danes, who took a more pragmatic approach. They were the logistics wizards of the Viking world, and their seating plans reflected that. The Danes understood that mead halls were not just social venues, they were also places for strategy sessions and planning raids. Therefore, their seating charts often resembled a military formation, with warriors arranged by rank and specialty. If you were a shield-bearer, you'd better believe you were seated next to the axe-wielders, lest you be caught off guard during a mead-fueled debate about the merits of raiding England versus France. Laws, edicts, taxes, and those darn ledgers. Now, you might be wondering how the Vikings managed to keep track of all these seating arrangements amid their mead consumption and the occasional skirmish. Enter the world of Viking laws and regulations. Yes, they had those. The Thing, a local assembly of free men, often decreed the rules governing mead hall gatherings. These assemblages were not just for discussing raiding strategies, they also served as the official regulatory body for seating charts. Yes, the Vikings had a robust system in place to ensure no one was left sitting on the floor with a mead stain on their tunic. In fact, in the year 970, the Thing of Uppsala issued a decree known as the Mead Hall Seating Edict, which mandated that every mead hall must have a clearly defined seating chart, complete with designated spots for warriors based on their achievements in battle and contributions to the community. It was like a medieval version of a VIP list, complete with a velvet rope and all. Failure to comply could result in hefty fines, which were often paid in mead. Talk about a win-win. As if that wasn't enough, tax collectors made rounds to ensure mead halls maintained proper ledgers of who sat where. Imagine a burly Viking with a quill in one hand and a mug of mead in the other, meticulously recording the seating arrangements while trying not to spill his drink. The irony of such a scene is almost poetic. These records were essential for the local chieftains to maintain their power and prestige. When guests arrived, they would consult the ledgers to ensure everyone was seated according to their social standing. Only the most esteemed warriors could sit near the chieftain, while those who had recently returned from a raid might find themselves relegated to the far end of the hall, next to the kitchen, where the smell of roasted meat was almost enough to drown out their shame. Logistics and supply chains, the real MVPs of mead hall culture. Logistics in the Viking world was a finely tuned machine, and mead halls were no exception. We often think of Vikings as fierce raiders, but they were also masterful traders and planners. When it came to hosting a mead hall gathering, the logistics of seating arrangements were just as important as the mead itself. Imagine a bustling Viking settlement preparing for a grand feast. The local chieftain would dispatch runners across the region to inform warriors of the upcoming gathering, ensuring that the most esteemed guests were made aware of their rightful place in the seating hierarchy. This was no small task, considering the vast distances involved. Runners would travel over mountains and through forests, often facing treacherous conditions to deliver the news. Once the invitations were sent out, the mead hall itself had to be prepared. This meant not just cleaning the space but also ensuring that the seating arrangements were set up in accordance with the laws laid out by the thing. Benches were positioned, cushions were fluffed, and each spot was marked with a small token, a piece of wood, a stone, or even a mead horn. Supply chains came into play as well. Mead had to be procured, along with food and other essentials for the feast. Local brewers and farmers would coordinate to ensure that the right quantities were available for the gathering. It wasn't uncommon for mead halls to run out of supplies mid-feast, resulting in some rather awkward seating rearrangements as guests scrambled to make sure they were still in the good graces of the chieftain. Record keeping, an exercise in absurdity. As the logistics unfolded, the Vikings took record keeping to a whole new level. While we often think of Vikings as brawny warriors, many were surprisingly literate. Monks and skalds kept detailed records of mead hall gatherings, often writing down not just who sat where, but also the details of the feasts that took place. These records were a mix of practical information and elaborate storytelling. For instance, you might find entries detailing how many barrels of mead were consumed or how many sheep were roasted. But there were also tales of guests who, after too much mead, had to be physically removed from the chieftain's seat, often with much hilarity ensuing. One particularly amusing entry from the late 10th century describes a notorious incident involving a chieftain named Ragnar the Red and a particularly rowdy group of warriors. After a few too many rounds of mead, Ragnar declared that he would swap seats with a lowly warrior named Bjorn, who had just returned from a raid. The record states that the swap led to bitter disputes, much laughter, and at least 3 broken benches. A surprising, grotesque anecdote, the Mead Hall Massacre of 1020. But not all tales from the mead halls are filled with laughter and light-hearted camaraderie. One particularly grotesque anecdote from the annals of Viking history is the infamous Mead Hall Massacre of 1020. In the small village of Skane, tensions were running high between rival clans. Both sides were invited to a mead hall gathering to settle their differences over a feast and a few rounds of mead. The seating chart, meticulously planned, had the opposing chieftains seated at opposite ends of the hall, with their respective warriors flanking them. As the evening progressed, the mead flowed like water, and both sides began to loosen up. Laughs turned to jeers, and jeers turned to insults. What started as a friendly gathering quickly escalated into a full-blown brawl. Amid the chaos, one particularly hot-headed warrior named Grimnir, who had taken offense at a jest made by the rival chieftain, grabbed a mead horn and hurled it across the hall. The horn struck the chieftain squarely in the forehead, leading to a chain reaction of violence. Tables were overturned, warriors were punched, and soon the mead hall was a frenzy of flying fists and broken benches. In the aftermath of this mead-fueled melee, the records state that there were many bruises, several lost teeth, and one unfortunate warrior who was accidentally impaled on a broken bench leg. It was a disgrace that would haunt the village for generations. Conclusion: raising a horn to mead hall regulations. So, there you have it, the thrilling, if not slightly absurd, history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. While the image of brawny warriors battling for glory and treasure might capture our imagination, it's the subtler intricacies of their social structures that tell a more nuanced story. From regional variations to meticulous record-keeping, the Vikings were not just warriors, they were logistics experts navigating the complexities of their mead hall gatherings. So, the next time you raise a horn of mead in celebration, remember the painstaking efforts that went into ensuring proper seating arrangements throughout history. And who knows? You might just find yourself in a modern-day equivalent of a mead hall, navigating the social hierarchy of your friends, hopefully without the threat of impalement. Scowl. The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. In the grand tapestry of Viking history, where sagas of glory, conquest, and valiant deeds dominate the narrative, one might easily overlook the less scintillating aspects of Norse culture. Among these is the surprisingly intricate web of seating chart regulations that govern the social gatherings at mead halls. While one might think that the arrangement of benches and tables in these communal spaces would be a matter of practicality, history reveals a complex interplay of social hierarchy, familial affiliations, and even the occasional absurdity. ##### minor figures and petty rules. At the heart of these seating regulations were often minor figures who wielded an outsized influence in their respective communities. Consider the role of the Huskarls, the elite warriors sworn to protect the Lord, who frequently found themselves at the center of mead hall seating disputes. Their importance often extended beyond the battlefield, and they were known to engage in the minutiae of seating arrangements, believing that where one sat could determine not just camaraderie but also status and favor. One particularly amusing instance occurred in the year 970 AD, when a minor chieftain named Eirik the Unruly hosted a midwinter feast in his mead hall in Norway. Eirik had a penchant for the dramatic and often took offense easily. During this feast, the seating chart was meticulously planned. Eirik designated seats based on a combination of age, prowess in battle, and the often arbitrary criteria of whether he had shared a drink with the guest in the past. When Bjorn, a local farmer, was seated next to an unremarkable goat herder instead of the esteemed Jarl, a minor skirmish ensued. The argument escalated into a raucous brawl that resulted in several tables being overturned, a few broken mead jugs, and a lasting feud, or what is humorously referred to as the Great Goat Incident. This event, while minor in the grand narrative of Viking conquests, underscored the seriousness with which seating arrangements were treated. ####Case studies with dates and lists. The historical record is dotted with case studies that illustrate the sometimes ludicrous nature of these seating regulations. One such example is the Great Feast of Yule in 1022 AD, held in the mead hall of King Harold the Brave. The event attracted many dignitaries from across the Viking realms, and the seating chart became a matter of intense debate. 1. Seating chart participants *. King Harold the Brave, host. Jarl Rolf the Stout. Eirik the Cunning, notorious for his sharp tongue. Freydis the Fierce, warrior woman known for her temper. Torgny the Tall, self-proclaimed tallest man in the hall. 2. Seating assignments *. High table * King Harold, Jarl Rolf, and Freydis. Middle table * Eirik, with a view of the high table, and his loyal followers. Low table * Torgny and various farmers, including Bjorn from the earlier incident, who had a penchant for spilling mead. During this feast, Eirik was incensed that he was not seated at the high table, despite having brought a splendid gift of silver goblets. The ensuing argument, complete with threats to turn the mead hall into a battlefield, underscored the deep-seated beliefs regarding seating hierarchy. ##### Comparisons to other regions. While Viking mead hall seating regulations may seem peculiar, they were not unique to Norse culture. In contrast, the Anglo-Saxons had their own set of rules concerning social gatherings, often reflecting their feudal system. In a typical Anglo-Saxon mead hall, the king would sit at the head, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and warriors, while lesser nobles and common folk would occupy the periphery. In the Byzantine Empire, seating arrangements were similarly rigid, with designated places for the emperor, his family, and the various layers of nobility. However, what set the Vikings apart was the degree to which individual personality and local customs influenced these arrangements. Unlike the more bureaucratic Byzantine system, Viking seating often hinged on personal grievances, rivalries, and the whims of the host. #### Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings illuminate the practices surrounding mead hall seating. Excavations of Viking sites, such as the famous Gokstad ship burial and the remains of mead halls in places like York and Lindisfarne, provide insights into how these communal spaces were structured. For example, the layout of benches often reveals a hierarchy, with the high table raised slightly above the others, indicating the importance of social ranking. Researchers have found remnants of animal bones and pottery that suggest feasts were not merely gatherings for sustenance but elaborate performances where seating arrangements played a pivotal role. One particularly fascinating discovery at a mead hall in Norway yielded a series of wooden tablets inscribed with names and seating assignments dating back to the year 850 AD. These tablets, often humorously referred to as the Viking guest list, contained not only names but also notes like, "Do not sit next to Ragnhild, she spills mead." Such artifacts reveal a culture that took its seating arrangements as seriously as its battles. ### The role of women. Women in Viking society also played a significant role in mead hall dynamics, often influencing seating arrangements through their familial ties and social status. Take the case of Lagertha, a legendary shield maiden who was said to have commanded her own mead hall. It is recorded that she had specific rules about seating. Guests were often informed upon arrival of their assigned places, and any deviation could lead to swift retribution. In one notable event during the summer solstice feast in 970 AD, Lagertha's mead hall hosted a gathering of warriors and their families. She imposed a rule stating that no feuding clans could sit together, a rule designed to foster peace during the festivities. Despite her best intentions, a drunken brawl erupted when a member of a feuding clan accidentally sat beside another. Lagertha resolved the conflict with a deft combination of diplomacy and physical prowess, illustrating the complexities of mead hall seating regulations in a male-dominated society. ### Rhetorical questions to engage curiosity. As we delve deeper into this seemingly mundane aspect of Viking life, one must ponder, what underlying social tensions might have been exacerbated by something as trivial as a seating chart? Could the very act of sitting together, or not, have shaped the alliances and rivalries that defined an era? Moreover, in an age where battles were fought over land and honor, how could something as innocuous as a mead hall seating arrangement influence the course of history? Conclusion. The history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations is a testament to the complexities of social structures within Norse culture. Beneath the veneer of warrior bravado and grand sagas lies a world where minor figures and petty rules dictated the flow of social interactions. From the Great Goat incident to the rigid protocols of King Harold's feast, the intricacies of seating arrangements reveal much about the values and hierarchies of Viking society. As we reflect on these regulations, we are reminded that even the most mundane aspects of life can illuminate the rich tapestry of our shared human experience. The mead hall, a cornerstone of Viking social life, was not merely a place for feasting and revelry, it was a stage where the drama of life played out, one seat at a time. The lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations. When one thinks of Viking culture, images of fierce warriors, longboats slicing through icy waters, and grand feasts in mead halls often come to mind. Yet, beneath this rugged exterior lay a surprisingly structured society with its own set of social norms and regulations, including the often overlooked aspect of seating arrangements in mead halls. While this might seem trivial in the grand narrative of Viking history, the seating chart regulations reveal much about social hierarchy, cultural values, and even petty rivalries among the Norse. Minor figures and petty rules. At the heart of these regulations were minor figures within Viking society who wielded unexpected influence. The seating overseer, a title bestowed upon the least esteemed of the chieftain's advisors, was responsible for ensuring that seating arrangements adhered to the strict social hierarchy. Often a former warrior or bard, this position was generally passed down through generations, creating a lineage of seating overseers who would fuss over the minutiae of seating placement with the fervor of a high-ranking nobleman. The rules governing seating were not merely arbitrary, they reflected the complex social structure of Viking society. For instance, it was considered improper for a lower-class farmer, regardless of their bravery in battle, to sit at the same table as an esteemed jarl, noble, or even a wealthy merchant. The act of mingling across social strata was frowned upon, and the overseer would often be seen lurking near the tables, ready to enforce seating arrangements with a pointed finger and a stern glare. Minor rules, while seemingly trivial, could lead to feuds that echoed through generations. In one notable case from 873 CE, a minor chieftain named Eirik was exiled for a year after he allowed a prominent warrior, known as Thrain, to share a table with his own family. This breach of etiquette led to accusations of favoritism and resulted in a series of escalating vendettas between Eirik's clan and Thrain's kin, ultimately culminating in a bloody confrontation that historians now refer to as the Feast of the Fractured Tables. Case studies with dates and lists. Several documented cases from the Viking Age illustrate the absurdity of these seating regulations. The Great Feast of Uppsala, in 1021 CE provides one such example. During this grand gathering, records indicate that the seating chart was meticulously planned weeks in advance. The following is a brief list of notable attendees and their respective seating arrangements. 1. King Olav II, head of the table, flanked by his trusted advisors. 2. Jarl Hakon of Uppland, sat to the immediate right of the king, a position of high honor. 3. Freydis, the shield maiden, placed at the far end, despite her heroic status, due to her contentious relationship with the king. 4. Bjorn the merchant, seated at the lower table, a clear indication of his lower status despite his wealth. In a bizarre turn of events, Freydis reportedly protested her placement by throwing a horn of mead across the hall, which struck Bjorn and ignited a brawl that resulted in several broken tables and a very disgruntled King Olav. The incident was later referenced in sagas as the Mead Hall Melee, emphasizing how seriously these seemingly minor rules could escalate. Another significant case occurred in 987 CE during the Feast of the Dead, where the seating arrangements were intended to honor fallen warriors. However, a last-minute adjustment by the seating overseer placed the son of a deceased jarl next to a rival clan leader, igniting tensions that had been simmering for years. The resulting altercation led to several notable injuries, including a broken arm for the clan leader, and initiated the infamous blood feuds of the North. Comparisons to other regions. The Viking seating chart regulations, while unique, were not entirely devoid of parallels in other cultures. In the medieval courts of England, for instance, seating arrangements were equally indicative of one's social standing. The English court even had a system of ranked seating that dictated where one could sit at the king's table. However, unlike the Vikings, who adopted a more communal approach to dining, the English nobility often dined in isolation, reinforcing class divisions. Similarly, in the Byzantine Empire, seating at the imperial table was a matter of life and death, with the emperor's favor often reflected in seating positions. Yet, the Byzantine system was far more elaborate, featuring a hierarchy that included titles such as patrician, senator, and magister to denote status. In contrast, the Viking system was refreshingly straightforward, albeit no less fraught with tension. Interestingly, the Mongol Empire had its own customs surrounding seating, particularly at the yurt feasts. The Great Khan would always occupy the central position, while lesser leaders would sit in descending order of importance around him. While this bears some resemblance to the Viking system, the Mongols tended to be more egalitarian during feasts, with a focus on sharing rather than rigid hierarchy. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have shed light on these mead hall seating arrangements. In the late 20th century, excavations at the site of a Viking-age longhouse in Norway uncovered remnants of benches and tables arranged in a manner that suggests a distinct hierarchy. The positioning of the benches indicated that the higher status individuals likely occupied the inner circle near the hearth, while those of lower status were relegated to the outer edges. Additionally, grave goods found in burial sites have provided insights into the social standing of individuals. For instance, a warrior buried with a finely crafted sword and an ornate drinking horn likely would have enjoyed a prominent seat at mead halls, while those interred with simpler items had a lower social status, reflecting their probable seating arrangements during feasts. One particularly fascinating find at the site of a mead hall in Denmark revealed a series of notched wooden beams, which some archaeologists speculate could have been used to indicate seating assignments. While this theory remains contentious, it certainly adds an intriguing layer to our understanding of Viking social customs. Rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. What drove the Vikings, a culture known for its raiding and conquests, to create such rigid seating arrangements in their mead halls? Was it merely a reflection of their societal values, or could it have been a subtle mechanism for maintaining power and control within their clans? As we delve deeper into the seemingly mundane world of seating charts, we uncover a rich tapestry of human behavior, social structure, and even petty rivalries. How did these minor rules shape the very fabric of Viking society, and what can they teach us about the complexities of human interaction throughout history? Conclusion. The history of Viking mead hall seating chart regulations may seem like a trivial footnote in the grand saga of Norse history. Yet, this seemingly mundane aspect of their culture reveals much about their social structure, cultural values, and the intricate web of relationships that defined Viking life. From the petty rivalries ignited by minor breaches of etiquette to the archaeological evidence that sheds light on their customs, the seating arrangements in mead halls offer a unique lens through which to view the complexities of Viking society. In a world so often characterized by conflict and conquest, the seemingly innocuous act of sharing a meal becomes a stage for examining power dynamics, social stratification, and the human condition itself. As we ponder the legacy of these seating chart regulations, we are reminded that the past is not merely a collection of grand events but a tapestry woven from the threads of everyday life, complete with its own set of rules, rivalries, and, perhaps, a bit of outrageousness. #### The lackluster history of Viking Mead Hall seating chart regulations. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th to the early 11th century, is often romanticized for its fierce warriors, longships, and exploration of new lands. However, less glamorous yet equally intriguing aspects of Viking life include the regulations that govern social interactions within mead halls. Among these were the seating chart regulations, which, while seemingly minor, reveal much about the social hierarchies, power dynamics, and cultural norms of the Viking Age. ###### Minor figures and petty rules. In the vast political landscape of the Viking Age, where kings and jarls commanded respect and fear, the mead halls served as a microcosm of society. One would think that the seating arrangements were determined solely by status. However, a plethora of lesser-known figures influenced these seemingly petty rules. Among them was the huskarls, elite warriors sworn to protect their lord, whose seating rights were dictated not only by loyalty but also by the number of victories they had achieved in battle. The skalds, poets and historians of the Viking Age, had a unique place in the seating hierarchy as well. Their status was often ambiguous. While they were respected for their art, their position could fluctuate based on the lord's favor. If a skald recited a particularly dull saga, they might find themselves relegated to the less desirable benches towards the back, a fate reminiscent of schoolchildren sent to the corner for poor behavior. This kind of whimsical punishment illustrates the capricious nature of social standing in mead halls. Furthermore, the FYRD, the local militia, had a peculiar rule: if a member was caught snoozing during a mead hall discussion, they were demoted to the drunken row, the least favorable seating area where only the most inebriated patrons would sit. This rule was not merely about maintaining decorum, it served as a subtle reminder that participation in communal discussions was not only expected but required. ######Case studies with dates and lists. The importance of seating arrangements in mead halls is documented in various sagas and historical accounts. One notable case occurred in the year 986 CE, during a particularly boisterous feast hosted by Jarl Eirik Bloodaxe in Norway. The seating chart for the evening was meticulously planned and included the following categories. 1. The high table, reserved for Eirik, his family, and honored guests. 2. The noble row, for loyal jarls and their families, including a select few skalds. 3. The warrior section, for huskarls and other elite warriors who had proven themselves in battle. 4. The FYRD and commoners, this was the largest section, filled with local militia and townsfolk. Tensions arose when a particularly brash FYRD member, Bjorn the Boisterous, attempted to sit at the noble row, claiming he had slain a bear with his bare hands. His audacious claim was met with laughter and pointed fingers, and he was promptly escorted to the drunken row by fellow warriors, highlighting the strict enforcement of seating regulations. Another case study from 1022 CE in Sweden illustrates the nuances of mead hall seating. During a gathering to commemorate the king's victory over the Swedish King Olav, King Olaf Skotkonung established a seating chart that favored foreign dignitaries. The resulting discontent among local jarls led to a minor rebellion, with disgruntled nobles proclaiming, "How can a foreigner sit above us when our blood has conquered these lands?" This incident not only underscores the significance of seating arrangements but also reveals the deep-rooted connections between social standing and regional pride. ###### Comparisons to other regions. Comparing Viking Mead Hall seating regulations to those of other regions reveals fascinating contrasts and similarities. In Anglo-Saxon England, for instance, the Mead Hall was also central to social life, but seating arrangements were dictated more by lineage than by individual accomplishments. The Witan, an assembly of nobles and advisors, often dictated seating based on bloodlines, with the king seated at the highest point. In contrast, Viking seating arrangements were more fluid, allowing for a certain degree of meritocracy, albeit one defined by martial prowess. In medieval France, seating at feasts was similarly rigid, dictated by feudal hierarchies. However, the French system was more formalized, with distinct titles and roles, such as vassals and lieges, that determined who could sit where. In contrast, Viking seating was often subject to the whims of the host, leading to more unpredictable outcomes. The Japanese Heian period also featured designated seating arrangements at banquets, but these were heavily influenced by aesthetics and poetry, with a focus on beauty over martial valor. In this context, the samurai might have found themselves seated based on their ability to compose haikus rather than their skill in battle, illustrating a marked difference from Viking priorities. #####archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have provided substantial insight into the seating arrangements within mead halls. Excavations at sites like Gokstad and Oseberg in Norway have revealed remnants of benches and tables that suggest a tiered seating system. The Oseberg ship, which dates back to the early 9th century, contained elaborate carvings that depict scenes of feasting, hinting at the importance of social gatherings in Viking culture. Moreover, items such as drinking horns and bejeweled goblets found at these sites indicate that the quality and decorum of the drinking vessels were also a matter of social standing. Those seated at the high table often received the finest goblets, while the commoners were relegated to using sturdy wooden cups. Interestingly, the discovery of burnt bones and remnants of mead in various sites suggests that communal feasting involved not only the consumption of alcohol but also a ritualistic aspect, possibly linked to the seating arrangements. The fact that certain seats were often left empty for the gods during feasts indicates a level of reverence and belief that affected the social dynamics within the hall. ###### The role of women in mead hall seating. While traditional narratives often sideline women in discussions of Viking society, their roles were more nuanced than generally portrayed. Women like Lagertha, the legendary shield maiden, had their own seating rights that reflected their status. In mead halls, women of high status were often seated beside their husbands, albeit with certain restrictions. Their seating arrangements were not only about social standing but also about their roles as peace weavers in a society that valued alliances through marriage. Interestingly, Archaeological evidence from Viking burial sites indicates that women were not only participants but also hosts of mead hall gatherings, especially during times of celebration. This raises the question, were women's contributions to mead hall culture overlooked due to the overwhelming focus on male warriors? Hashtag rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. 1. What hidden complexities lay beneath the seemingly trivial seating arrangements of Viking mead halls, and how might they reshape our understanding of Viking society? 2. How do these regulations reflect the values and beliefs of the Viking Age, and what can they teach us about modern social hierarchies? Hashtag conclusion. The minor figures and regulations surrounding seating charts in Viking mead halls, while seemingly mundane, provide a rich tapestry for understanding the social dynamics of the time. Through the lens of case studies, comparisons with other regions, and archaeological discoveries, it becomes evident that these regulations were a reflection of broader societal values. As we delve deeper into the lackluster history of Viking mead hall seating arrangements, we uncover not just the trivialities of a bygone era, but the very essence of what it meant to be a Viking, where every seat told a story, and every gathering was an opportunity to forge identities and alliances. And that's a wrap. We dove deep into the world of quirky inventions, proving once and for all that necessity really is the mother of all weirdness. Who knew a banana peeler could spark such joy? Here's a surprising twist. Did you know that the most popular invention of all time is the paperclip? It's simple but has held our lives together in more ways than one. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We always love hearing from our fellow inventors. Craving more? Check out our related episodes for even more mind-boggling creations that will leave you in stitches and awe. And hey, don't forget to turn on loop so this episode can play on repeat until you drift off into dreamland. Sweet dreams of innovation await.